Okay. The Power of Queer Heteronormativity and Queer Identity by Logan, Chaves, Prisila, Valadez, and Ivanna, Avila. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to start with our pre-questions. What is heteronormativity? Number 2 is how has heteronormativity manifested legally? Number 3 is what is the significance of looking at motherhood and families through a queer lens? Number 4, what are social positions? Give examples. What are gender social positions? Number 5, what are the effects of exposing a child and adults to queering sex and gender? Number 6, what is the most notable difference when it comes to lesbian-headed families? And lastly, number 7, why do LGBTQ families feel pressured by homonormativity? Next slide, please.
The article The Power of Queer by Rand Dozer starts by introducing the topic of gender and giving a baseline explanation to the discourse surrounding gender that will be discussed in detail moving further into the article. Gender is described as being separated into 2 categories of gender identity and gender expression. Gender identity is a phenomenological and intrinsic experience of gender, while gender expression is largely based off of socially constructed outward indicators that are meant to show one's gender. This complex viewpoint on gender is contrary to the mainstream view that gender is binary, and it is because of this binary view on gender that exclusion and heteronormativity occur. The idea of doing gender comes from a theory on a gender expression that focuses on identifying an individual's gender through performance of what that identity is viewed to partake in. This, along with the binary view on gender, is how one can act without falling outside of these categories. One example of how these social rules are still applied when falling outside of these strict views is that when gay men partake in childcare, then many come to praise them for giving their wives a break. It is assumed that they are straight and that men can't be the primary caretakers of children when people partake in these actions. Another way that heteronormativity manifests is in housework, with a lack of egalitarian distribution occurring more so with straight couples than with same-sex ones. These form more often with straight couples because it assumed that women should work in the home, which often oppresses women and stifles the opportunities that they may have otherwise, if not pressured into household labor. This assumption doesn't entirely eliminate the difference, though, since it is also shown that whoever works more will do less housework, but refutes the point of any biological significance to household labor. The final way that heteronormativity manifests itself is in the family structure, with the formation of the family itself. The nuclear family of a mother, a father, and a child is held as the gold standard, which is relatively simple, but excludes any marginalized identities from forming what the public would consider a functional family. The belief that anything outside of this is a negative manifests itself in issues like gay marriage, which may be kept illegal for a long time because of this heteronormative framework. Heteronormativity and the queering of traditional family structures. Commonly within society, because of the prevalence of heterosexual viewpoints being discussed in the public and the historical dismissal of oppression of others, their experiences are widely held as the standard within society and the norm. This naturally excludes any sexualities or identities that separate from this framework because they are seen as negative relative to the norm, which is heterosexuality in this case. The idea of queering is one that can happen by deliberate revolutionary action against these traditional heteronormative structures, or it can be expressed by simply possessing an identity that is outside of the traditional view. An example of this could either be one that consciously moves against these structures by deliberately undermining them, or in the case of the author, the mere expression of their identity within certain contexts forces those around them to look deeper at their previous ideas of gender. As a final overview of the points discussed, the queering and changing of family structure from the golden standard of the nuclear family is a necessity when trying to reach liberation. I believe the example of family is one that can be applied to every type of heteronormativity existing within these institutions.
Next, we have the politics of sameness. Because same-sex parents are more vulnerable to legal challenges to their parenthood, there has been a heavy investment in showing they do not differ from heterosexual parents. Families that include one mother, one father, and their biological children are assumed to be the golden standard, to which LGBTQ families must measure up to. Overall, evidence suggests that there are small but significant differences in children and families that favor lesbian-headed families relative to families headed by heterosexual parents. One of the most notable differences is the lack of abuse among lesbian-headed families. In contrast, over 1/4 of children in heterosexual families report physical abuse and 8% report sexual abuse. Right here, we have a family of a lesbian couple and their child in the picture. The next slide, please. All right, the next slide, we're going to talk about homonormality, the new normal. As same-sex couples and families become more visible and gain access to more rights and privileges, such as gay marriages, their family may become more normalized. Gaining social acceptance, however, increases the pressure to assimilate to heteronormative practices and structures. The new normal is affluent, white, monogamous, and conventional in every way except sexual orientation. The closer a couple and family resembles a heteronormativity family, the more valuable and less sanctioned they are. In the picture, we have a son talking about, we play, talk, read, hug, and sometimes fight, just like the other families. I love daddy and papa with all my heart. This basically saying that no matter what, these parents are still the same as any other parents, no matter their sexual orientation. Next slide, please.
Okay, so now we go into transgressive mothering. So it's important to note that when discussing the aspect of queering, we need to focus on the deviant cases of gender, sexual behavior, or identities that do not neatly fit into assumed categories, especially the binaries of sex, gender, and sexual orientation. Looking at motherhood and families through a queer lens is useful, not just in thinking about LGBTQ parents, but in examining accepted notions of how the work of mothering in families is done. For example, a guy mom who identifies as a masculine, trans-identified mother disrupts the concept of mothering, nurturing, families, and the natural division of labor. Now we ask ourselves why. The reason is because in heterosexual families, or most likely, the mother is the nurturer and the father is the breadwinner. But when we have same-sex marriages, for example, lesbian couples, it disrupts the notion of who divides what work. Next slide, please. So queer parenting. Queer mothering creates a constant gender trouble when mothers are unable to conform to the gendered binary. For example, a guy mom who appears masculine yet participates in everyday mothering queers the notions of gender, motherhood, and the family. For example, a guy mom who takes his or her daughter to ballerina class. This disrupts the idea of mothering because normally it's mothers who are more involved with the children's activities because, like I said before, the fathers are the breadwinner. Gay men also face similar troubles when their involvement in everyday parenting challenges heteronormative beliefs regarding gender, sexual orientation, and the natural gender order of the family. Trans-identified genderqueer or masculine mothers disrupt the idea that femininity and motherhood naturally align with that of a woman, particularly feminine women. Here we have two examples that in society today would disrupt the notion of heteronormative beliefs. For example, a man who appears to be pregnant has clearly transformed into a trans male. Next slide, please. So according to the authors, social position refers to the statuses one has in relation to individuals and institutions such as employers, family, school, or the legal system. For example, when you enroll your child to school, you never have like a mother, father part of the application. You either have a mother and a father. This is one of many challenges that same-sex couples parents face. A guy mom's social position as a mother affects their personal life more than its gender identity, appearance, or behavior. The gendered position of a single mother affects individuals not because they're feminine or related to a woman identity, but because there are gender differences in access to power and resources. Next slide, please. Now we go into queering childhood. A common concern made by relatives, strangers, and even same-sex parents themselves is whether a child can have a healthy development without a male role model, and in the case of gay male parents, a female role model. It is commonly believed that male and female role models are necessary to socialize children into gender. A common notion is that being that boys that are raised without a male role model won't grow into real men. This is one of many misconceptions that queering parents face. Evidence suggests that this may be true to a certain extent, but it has been proven that boys raised by lesbians are shown to be more empathetic, open to differences, and value egalitarian relationships. So this proves that the misconceptions around same-sex parents are not reliable or effective. Next slide, please. So the benefits of queering on children. So childhood exposure to the decoupling of masculinity and femininity from sex and gender identity could result in adults with more diverse set of behaviors and interests in an altered worldviews. Discussing gender and inequality, which most likely happens in same-sex marriages, can result in children who are more aware of gendered scripts and have less likely to engage and are less likely to engage in gendered acts. Most importantly, children who become aware that social roles are optional and not inevitable are are more likely to change and to pass on these ideas that gendered scripts or gender behaviors are normal. Next slide, please.
All right, so now we're gonna move on to our quiz portion of the presentation. So number one, what is our heteronormativity? So our answers are gonna be bolded in, well, they're gonna be bolded. So it's gonna be B, the commonly held belief that heterosexual structures are the norm in society. Number two is how has heteronormativity manifested legally? Our answer is B, heteronormativity is part of the reason why gay marriage was not allowed. Number three, how does the ideal for queering take place within marriage and family? B, those who don't fit into traditional family structure defy unjustified standards and create a new view on family. Number four, how does the author experience with gender change common perception and shape their experiences? The answer is going to be B. The author's experience of being a guy mom confuses those around them as he drifts between what is perceived as feminine and masculine. Next slide, please. Okay, so then we're going to go to number five. What are the effects of exposing a child and adults to queering sex and gender? So the answer is going to be C. Children are more prone to develop a diverse set of behaviors, interests, and altered worldview. Thus, we realize that gender behaviors are optional, not inevitable. Number six, what is the most notable differences when it comes to lesbian-headed families? B, there will be a lack of abuse in lesbian-headed family households. Number seven, why do LGBTQ families feel pressured by homonormativity? It's going to be A, gaining social acceptance, however, increases the pressure to assimilate to heteronormative practices and structure. And next, we're going to go on to our activity. Next slide, please.
For the activity, we decided to do a definitions and viewpoints activity. The directions will be, you'll be provided with a term to define and viewpoints on the term from both a sociological and conventional standpoint. This is to put into context what the difference between the sociological thinking versus the difference in general societal thinking, and to analyze the difference between these two. Definitions for each viewpoint are worth 3 points, and explaining terminology gives 2 extra points. A different term will be given each round for further explanation that is used within both of the definitions. For the first example of what is gender, explain both conventional and sociological viewpoints, the sociological answer for 3 points would be, gender is divided into both identity and expression, identity being a phenomenological experience of gender that is then expressed outwardly into what is known as gender expression. These are commonly sorted as a spectrum between masculinity and femininity, and is socially constructed. The more conventional answer would be, gender is binary between men and women that is dictated by biology. Women are feminine and men are masculine. So within both of these definitions, one of the key points was femininity. So the bonus for 2 points would be to define femininity. The answer to this would be, femininity can be expressed in whatever way the individual sees fit, but is seen socially as traits and behaviors commonly associated with activities and occupations traditionally associated or occupied by women.
And that's going to conclude our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.